Welcome back to another episode of EVE Business Insider. Today we're talking about Citadels. As a generalized concept, we're going to go over the more technical description and inner workings of Citadels in future videos, such as the access control lists and permissions as part of how to set up your first Citadel tutorial that I'll be doing probably next week, so make sure you hit that sub button for that. But today we're going to take a look at how these fit into the universe, sort of what are the bits and pieces that go into them in terms of production, and why do we care about it in a business sense. So let's jump straight in. So Citadels represent the new generation of structures in EVE Online. They're currently part of a phased rollout that will see player-owned starbases and stations as well give way to the proliferation of these new structures throughout New Eden. So they differ from the traditional structures in a couple of key ways that we're going to get into now. The first of which is called the asset safety mechanic. Asset safety mechanic is something that can be triggered by players at any time they so desire, or otherwise will be triggered by the destruction of the Citadel in high-sec, low-sec, or null-sec space. This is exempt behavior for wormhole space specifically that we'll look at in a minute. But basically, you have two options. Number one, you have the option to move your assets to another station or Citadel within the same solar system, and number two, after a brief cooldown, and after paying a small fee, you have the ability to move your assets to the nearest low-sec station, which is something pretty unique to the universe that hasn't really happened before. And so my prediction for this is basically that there will be certain choke points. In other words, there are probably entire regions who will funnel their asset safety mechanic trapped assets back to that same station. And particularly for those of you that live in the east, I think you'll find the Mimitar stations, maybe the Undocks will be camped or something to that effect. But nonetheless, this is a pretty interesting mechanic that's going to allow kind of a more prolonged engagement over null-sec space, hopefully, because it does allow the defenders, and if that defending force is indeed occupied and loses the occupation battle, then they'll be able to still retrieve those assets and continue to fight on. Whereas otherwise, what would have happened is a mechanic by which their assets would be trapped, and they would be forced basically to sell those assets, or perhaps to move them out by the dead of night, and take some significant risks in that. So this concept of fire sales is something that will be going away in the future, basically as a result of this mechanic called asset safety. The next key way that Citadels differ from stations or player-owned starbases is in their defense and the robust nature of their defense. So this does vary a little bit depending on which class of Citadel we're talking about, and they do range in size quite significantly, as we will look at in just a minute. But for example, all Citadels have the option to run offensive E-War modules such as Scramblers, Stasis Webfires, Warp Disruptors, very similar to what you might find on a ship, as well as Neutralizers, a type of missile battery called a Stand-Up missile, as well as a type of battery called a stand-up guided bomb, which is particularly powerful, even on the smallest of the Citadels, which is coincidentally called a medium. In addition to that, Citadels have rigging slots, again, very similar to ships. However, a lot of these rigs have to do with what is the nature of the Citadel. And so, for example, on engineering complexes, which we'll get to a little bit later on, these have options for rigging such as reprocessing, or perhaps bonuses to one particular type of manufacture or another. And in the case of Citadels, you'll find primarily defensive or offensive bonuses in these rigs, but again, very similar to ships with those. Additionally, they do have service modules associated with them, which is the method that you bring station services on over to these Citadels, and in fact, some of them are restricted in the types of services they can offer. These, of course, being such as reprocessing, cloning service, obviously markets and contracts and stuff like that. This is all going to tie in as well to the fuel use of the Citadel. So starting with the medium Citadel, you have a base fuel cost, which is determined simply by its sort of parallel to the starbases that they're meant to replace. So the medium Citadel is equivalent to a small starbase in fuel. On top of that, each of the service modules that you add are going to increase the fuel cost for the Citadel. Now, the fuel that these burn is indeed fuel blocks, and you can fill them up with any type of fuel block. They don't have to be a racial fuel block as they would for a starbase. So what this allows for you to do is to either build your own fuel locally wherever you live in the universe, of course using the racial isotope that's near you, or to simply import whatever price is lowest on this fuel block table. The method by which a Citadel owner assigns control and permissions to various individuals, corps, or alliances for Citadels is again different from stations. In stations, we could only assign a minimum threshold for our standings to impact things like reprocessing, the ability for players to dock, and so on. However, with Citadels, we have a new system which is much more robust and flexible called the Access Control List, which allows us to set very fine-tuned controls on exactly who can use markets, who can use each of the services, including docking, and if there's a price associated, we can even break that up by price. So this is a very nice addition to the permissions table, especially where stations were particularly lacking. And the last key difference from Citadels to stations is basically another new mechanic. It's called a ship Tether, and what this is basically a life support line that's going to reach out from the Citadel to any ships within the docking radius. Read, you can be bumped off of your tether, and so long as you're on, you'll be invulnerable to enemy target locks, as well as you'll have your capacitor and HPs regened by this tether itself. As well, it will go ahead and repair any modules for you that are damaged, so it's a really kind of neat mechanic for making a quick stopover in between Citadels. And of course, if you're a capital ship or something like that would otherwise be size restricted from docking, you can still take benefit from the structure even though you can't physically get inside. Let's take a look at some of the examples. So first off, we have the medium class Citadel shown here, which is definitely the one that is going to proliferate the universe with the most impact. In other words, this is the easiest, most entry-level Citadel for players to get a hold of. The cost for this is going to be between 1 and 2 billion, and the main restrictions include not being able to fit the point defense battery or more advanced batteries for defense, as well as the fact that capital ships are not going to be able to dock here. Now, freighters and jump freighters are exempt from this rule and will be able to dock at the medium Citadel, so that's an added benefit for players of industrial nature. But in general, I would recommend this type of Citadel for a short or mid-term deployment, or perhaps for a small wormhole corp or something like that. The next one that we'll look at is a parallel line to the defensive type Citadels. This is called the Engineering Complex, which we have looked at in previous videos and offers great benefit to producers and industrialists alike. So this one here, the medium variant, has the cheapest rigs, which makes it the most likely to be specialized in a job, and as well, it is the cheapest to deploy at, again, a cost of between 1 to 2 billion. The next one that we'll take a look at is the large Citadel, again defensive type Citadel, which opens up the possibility to run a module called a point defense battery. You can think of this module like a oversized smart bomb, although it's actually a large flight of missiles that are going to go ahead and take out any small targets and really clear the field of any of that drones and tackle and stuff of that nature. Very powerful module. Of course, as well, this class of Citadel is going to be able to accept capital ships, so your typical dreads, carriers, and stuff like that are going to find this a suitable home. Next up, we have the large variant of the Engineering Complex, again for industrialists, and this one is much more well suited to capital production. The rigs are a little bit more expensive than the medium, but again, I think it offers some great bonuses right off the bat. And so, if for those of us with enough finances to get started, I think this would be a great project for a small or medium industrial corp to take on. Absolutely, this will be the lifeline of kind of the business entrepreneur of New Eden, and I think the ability through these bonuses to get a price advantage is something that shouldn't be taken lightly. Next up in the extra large class for the defensive type Citadels, we have the extra large here, obviously, which has a couple of very interesting, unique unlocks. The first and foremost is something called a Arcing Vorton Projector, which is effectively a chain doomsday that's going to affect both capitals and subcapital ships, and has a maximum number of bounce possibilities. So it's going to strike one target and then branch out from there like fork lightning to additional targets. Very devastating type of defensive module. And as well, this type of structure has the ability to dock all ships up to super capitals in it, which of course is something that, Titan pilots across New Eden have been asking for as long as there have been Titan pilots in New Eden, right? So finally you have an ability, and yes, Titans are included in this asset safety mechanic, so are supers, to dock your Titan, dock your big ships, and finally have a truly safe way to sort of leave the game and guarantee that when you come back, your ships are as you've left them. So very unique type of structure here. Of course, the cost for these is astronomical, but in terms of the lifeline of alliances and coalitions, this has been a very big change in being able to secure a really safe zone of staging for you and your players, and absolutely these are going to be around for a long time in the future. And last but not least, we have the extra large class of the Engineering Complex, which is primarily used for building capital and super capital class ships due to its bonuses. Of course, again, the ability to price out your competition with the benefit of added material requirement reductions is just astronomical. I mean, for ships of this caliber, even 1% is going to be a huge savings. So absolutely, if you can build in one of these, I would highly advise it. Now, in terms of what happens when citadels fall under siege, to my knowledge, if you have jobs in an engineering complex, those will pause for the duration of the reinforced timer. But basically what will happen is the attacker will be forced to make an attack on the structure within its vulnerability period. This is a period that you set out of a 7-day window when you first anchor the citadel, and of course we'll cover this in our tutorial as well. But once the attacker has made an advance in this time period and put enough damage onto the structure in the allotted time frame to push it into reinforced, you will then both have opportunity to come back at a later date with an announced timer and go ahead and defend that structure. Now, for most citadels, you will have 2 of these reinforcements, so plenty of opportunity for the defenders to go ahead and make a stand. However, should the citadel be destroyed, it will trigger this aforementioned mechanic of asset safety. Now, in the case of engineering complexes, if you have a job running when the citadel is destroyed, your blueprints will be returned to you via this mechanic of asset safety. However, any materials that were used in the job will be lost and or dropped out as part of the wreck. So keep in mind there is pretty significant risk versus reward for operating out of one of these structures. Again, like before, I would advocate in HiSec only to trust structures that you know will be around for a long time, and or to plan your builds around the concept that the structure could cease to exist. The best use of a lot of these engineering complexes is in areas of space that players can actually control, and therefore you're able to get security and safeties through the network of other players. So hopefully this answers some of the questions that you've been having with citadels. This is a topic that we will be coming back around to in future series, both for the corporation topic as well as for specific tutorials, such as next week's video on anchoring your first citadel, in which we'll go over the anchoring process, the vulnerability schedule, and all that fun stuff. But that's pretty much it, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe. Of course, hit the notification bell and get my videos on day one, as well as if you're interested in EVE Online, check out, there's a link in the description for 250,000 SP. I'll be back again next week, guys. Thanks very much.